I haven't been sleeping well for weeks. Ever since I lost my job, my mind won't shut off at night, and when I do sleep, it's like my brain is punishing me with these awful, vivid nightmares. They aren't just bad dreams. They feel personal, like something is reaching inside my head and dragging out everything I try to suppress. Some nights, I dream of endless hallways, doors that lead nowhere, or versions of my apartment that aren't quite right. Other times, it's worse. I see my old office, but everything is abandoned, covered in dust. My boss stands at his desk, staring at me, his mouth open like he's screaming, but there's no sound. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that something is horribly wrong. A few days ago, I told my cousin about it. He's a therapist, and I figured he'd have some kind of insight. He said stress can manifest in dreams, and suggested I start keeping a journal, writing down everything I can remember right when I wake up. It might help you process what's really bothering you, he said. I wasn't sure it would work, but at this point, I'd try anything. So, I started jotting everything down, trying to find some kind of pattern or meaning behind these nightmares. But instead of helping, it felt like I was feeding them. The more I wrote, the worse they got. At first, the nightmares were just unsettling, but now they feel like something more. Last night, I dreamed that I was trapped in my childhood home, but the layout was wrong. Hallways stretching too far, doors leading to places that shouldn't exist. I heard my mom calling me from the basement, but when I went down, the stairs just kept going. The deeper I went, the colder it got, until I saw something at the bottom. It was me, lying there, eyes open, not breathing. I jolted awake so fast I nearly fell out of bed, gasping for air like I had actually been suffocating. I told my cousin about that dream the next day, hoping for reassurance, but his reaction was weird. He seemed too interested, asking for every detail, even how I felt physically during the dream. This could be important, he said, scribbling something in his notebook. I figured it was just the therapist in him, but something about the way he was taking notes felt clinical, like I wasn't his cousin, I was a subject. Still, I kept writing in the journal. Maybe he was right, and I just needed to push through. But deep down, I was starting to feel like I was being watched. That night, I tried to stay up as late as possible, dreading whatever my mind would throw at me next. I left the lights on, kept the TV playing some random show at low volume, anything to make my apartment feel less empty. But exhaustion won. At some point, I passed out on the couch, journal still open on my lap. And of course, the nightmares came back. This time, I was in my apartment, but something was off. The furniture looked like mine, but the proportions were wrong, stretched in weird angles. I heard knocking from inside my closet, slow and rhythmic, and even though I knew I shouldn't, I walked over and opened it. There was nothing there, just darkness. But then a hand reached out, my own hand, grabbing my wrist. I woke up screaming, convinced for a second that I still felt the grip on my arm. I didn't go back to sleep after that. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, staring at my reflection in the microwave door, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. My cousin's words echoed in my head, something about how dreams are just the subconscious processing emotions. But this didn't feel like my subconscious. It felt like something else. I flipped through my journal, reading over what I had written so far, and that's when I noticed something strange. Some of the entries, I didn't remember writing them. There were extra details in the descriptions, things I wouldn't have thought to include. In one of them, I had written that I heard my cousin's voice in a dream. But I had no memory of that at all. That discovery rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had just been too groggy when I wrote those details, that my exhausted brain was filling in the blanks. But deep down, it didn't feel like that. I spent the rest of the morning flipping through every page, looking for more inconsistencies. The worst part? I found them. In a dream I had last week, I wrote that I had seen my uncle standing in the corner of my bedroom, facing the wall. I remembered the dream, but I swore that detail hadn't been there when I first wrote it down. It felt impossible, like my own memories were shifting. But I had no way to prove it. I thought about calling my cousin, but something in me hesitated. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head, the way he seemed almost excited about my nightmares. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was just looking for someone to blame, because I felt like I was losing control. Instead, I did what I always did. I tried to ignore it. I threw the journal in my nightstand, locked my bedroom door, and forced myself to go through my usual routine. Shower, coffee, scrolling mindlessly on my phone. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in my apartment. By the time evening came, I felt like a zombie. My body ached from exhaustion, but the idea of sleeping terrified me. I left every light in my apartment on, like that would somehow keep the nightmares away. I even considered staying up all night, but I knew it wasn't sustainable. So I made a plan. I'd sleep for a few hours, set an alarm to wake myself up, and immediately write down anything I dreamed about before it could slip away. I don't know why, but I needed to see it, to prove to myself that I was still in control of my own mind. Around midnight, I finally gave in and crawled into bed, the journal and a pen on my nightstand, ready to go. I don't remember falling asleep. One second I was staring at the ceiling, and the next, I was in another nightmare. I was back in my apartment, but it was dark. Too dark. The kind of darkness that swallows everything. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. I heard something breathing, slow and steady, somewhere in the room. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, me. Standing by the bedroom door, watching me. Its head tilted slightly, as if studying me. I wanted to scream, to wake up, but I couldn't. The thing took a step closer, and then another. Just as it reached the edge of my bed, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like something had stabbed me right through the ribs. I gasped for air and bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My whole body was shaking. I grabbed at my chest, expecting to find some kind of wound, but there was nothing, just the lingering sensation of pressure, like something had been there. The room was exactly how I had left it, lights still on, my journal untouched on the nightstand. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That dream had felt too real, like it had left a mark on me in some way I couldn't see. I reached for my phone to check the time, but the moment I turned it on, my stomach dropped. There was a new notification. A missed call. I stared at the screen, my hands going cold. It was from my uncle. That didn't make sense. He was supposed to be on vacation, miles away with no reason to call me in the middle of the night. My first thought was that something had happened, an emergency. But when I tapped on the call log, I felt a fresh wave of unease. The call had come in at 3:13 a.m., the exact moment I had woken up from that nightmare. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he had just dialed me by mistake. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. Something was happening, and I was starting to feel like I was at the center of it. The nightmares didn't stop. They only became more vivid, more detailed. Every night, I would fall into a deeper and darker place, one that felt so real it was hard to tell if I was dreaming or awake. The first few nights, the dreams were abstract, filled with shapes and colors that made no sense. But soon, the images became more specific. I dreamt of the office I'd been fired from, but it wasn't the office I knew. The walls seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights flickering in and out of existence. No matter how hard I tried to fight it, the dreams kept coming. The sense of helplessness grew, and I could feel my mind unraveling bit by bit. The nightmares started to bleed into my waking life. I would see shadows moving in the corner of my vision, hear voices whispering my name when I was alone. It felt like I was being hunted by something I couldn't even see. I started to dread the moment I would close my eyes. Every time I did, I felt as though something was waiting for me, lurking in the darkness. I told my cousin about it, hoping he could offer some kind of solution, but instead, he just listened. He didn't seem as concerned as I thought he should be. "You're under a lot of stress," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "It's just your mind working through everything. I recommend you keep a journal. Write down your dreams and your emotions. It will help you understand what's really bothering you." He had always been the logical one, but this advice felt distant, impersonal, as though he wasn't fully present. I tried his advice, but it didn't help. The more I wrote, the more the nightmares intensified. I kept recounting the images, the feelings, the raw terror that lingered when I woke up. But as I filled the pages, I noticed something strange. The details of the nightmares began to blur together. Faces, places, emotions. Everything started to merge into a foggy mess, like the dreams were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand it. Every night, the darkness in my dreams grew stronger. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The pressure of it, the sensation of being trapped, was overwhelming. I began to fear sleep itself. The day was becoming just a distraction from the terror that awaited me at night. I started avoiding naps, staying up late to watch TV or read, anything to push the exhaustion away. But the nights were inevitable, and they always returned, worse than before. I could feel the weight of it bearing down on me. The fear was suffocating, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was paranoia. I started to wonder if the nightmares were trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to understand. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I wasn't the only one affected by this. Someone or something was manipulating the dreams, feeding them with my deepest fears. My cousin noticed my growing anxiety. "You look awful," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Have you been sleeping at all?" I shook my head. "Not really," I admitted, feeling the weight of the truth settle in my chest. He suggested I take a break, go for a walk, get some fresh air. But I knew that wouldn't help. The nightmares were inescapable, and every time I closed my eyes, they were waiting for me. I spent hours in the dark, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the shadows I saw weren't real, that the whispers weren't anything to be afraid of. But as the days dragged on, I could feel myself unraveling. I was tired, exhausted in a way I couldn't explain. And the more I resisted, the worse it became. I was slowly losing control. I started to isolate myself, afraid that anyone who got too close would be dragged into my nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming someone else, someone I didn't recognize. Each night, I fought against the pull of sleep, but it was a losing battle. The nightmare's grip on me was too strong, and soon, I would be consumed entirely. I woke up with a start, heart racing, drenched in sweat. My eyes darted around the room, disoriented, as though the walls themselves were shifting. I was alone, but I could still feel something, someone watching me. I reached for my phone, desperate for some sense of normalcy, but my hand shook so violently that it took me a few tries to unlock the screen. As I checked my notifications, my breath caught in my throat. There was a missed call from my uncle. He was on vacation. I knew he wasn't supposed to be calling me, especially not at this hour. The call had come through at 3:13 a.m., the exact moment I had woken up from the nightmare. My mind raced, piecing together the events. Why would he call me then? What was so urgent? I immediately checked the call log, but there was no voicemail, no message, nothing but a missed call. It felt like a message was being sent to me, though, something I wasn't supposed to know. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My stomach churned, and I started pacing the room. The phone call wasn't the only odd thing that had happened. The nightmares, the shadows, the feeling of being hunted, they were all connected. But how? I had no answers. My mind was a tangled mess of confusion and fear. I tried to call my uncle back, but the line went straight to voicemail. My calls weren't even going through. I couldn't stop thinking about the missed call. The details were beginning to add up, but they didn't make sense. Why would my uncle call at that exact moment? It felt like someone was orchestrating this whole thing, pulling the strings behind the scenes. I felt like a puppet, helpless in the face of something far larger than I could understand. There had to be more to this than just my imagination running wild. I tried to sleep again, desperate for rest. But as I closed my eyes, the nightmare came rushing back. It was darker this time, more tangible. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. But when I turned, there was nothing there. My heart pounded in my chest as I felt the pressure of something unseen closing in. The fear was overwhelming, paralyzing. I screamed, but no sound came out. I was trapped in the nightmare, unable to escape. When I woke up again, everything felt different. The room was unchanged, but I couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another call from my uncle. This time I answered. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension to it. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated. I don't know. I think something's wrong," I said, my voice shaky. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone shifting. I explained everything, the nightmares, the call, the strange feeling that something was off. "I don't know what to tell you," he said, his voice growing colder. "You're probably just stressed out. Try to get some rest." But it didn't sound like advice. It sounded like a dismissal, like he didn't want to be involved. I hung up the phone, feeling more unsettled than before. Something was happening, something I couldn't understand. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a random series of events. Someone was behind this, manipulating me, using me in ways I didn't fully comprehend. And I was too afraid to figure out who or why. I had always trusted my cousin. He was family, someone I believed I could count on. But that trust began to crumble when I started putting the pieces together. The strange call from my uncle, the missed messages, the way my cousin seemed so distant whenever I mentioned the nightmares. Everything pointed to him. He knew more than he was letting on. And that terrified me. I confronted him late one night. I demanded answers, questioning his involvement in the strange events that had been happening. He was calm, almost too calm, as he listened to my accusations. He didn't deny it, Instead, he told me the truth, his truth. "I've been conducting an experiment," he said flatly. "I needed someone to study the effects of fear and stress on the subconscious. You were the perfect candidate." I recoiled in horror as the words sank in. My cousin had been using me, manipulating my deepest fears for his own research. I had trusted him, confided in him, and all along, he had been observing me, taking notes, using my pain as data for his experiment. The realization hit like a slap across the face. All of my suffering, the nightmares, the fear, it had all been for his sick experiment. "You used me," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You knew everything. All the nightmares, all the fear, it was for this." His eyes remained cold, unaffected by my anger or betrayal. "Yes," he said simply. "It was for the study. You were always the best subject." My blood ran cold. How had I not seen it before? How had I missed the signs? I wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but I was paralyzed. The fear that had been building in me for weeks, the nightmares, the paranoia, none of it was my fault. It had all been orchestrated by him, the one person I had trusted the most. I could feel my world unraveling, piece by piece. There was no escaping it now. I had been a puppet, and my cousin had been the puppeteer all along. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why me?" His lips curled into a small smile, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who had won. "Because you were the perfect subject." I needed to see how far someone could be pushed before they broke. My heart sank as I realized the truth. The nightmares had never been real. They had been planted in my mind, manipulated by him, to see how much terror I could endure before I collapsed. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with the weight of his words. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The betrayal was overwhelming. My mind was spinning, and all I could do was stare at him, my eyes filled with tears. I had been nothing but an experiment to him. And now, I was left alone, with nothing but the terrifying knowledge that I had been used in ways I could never undo.